everybody. Good morning, everyone. Can anyone hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Tina Kwan, and I'm the founding member of the Hong Kong Youth for Climate Action. Welcome you all to this session. It's really an absolute pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Carbon Care Inner Lab to this panel discussion. Our session today will focus on how green finance contributes to green recovery. We have wonderful speakers with us here today, and I want to thank all the speakers and those of you who make the time to be with us today. It's a real pleasure to see that we have so many people joining this session, and then a chance for the audience to ask, and we have so many people joining this session virtually. The session today will be started with the panel discussion and then a chance for the audience to ask questions. You are welcome to ask any question in the chat room, and we'll pass the question to the speakers in the Q&A session later on. We are delighted to have a diverse panel of experts and practitioners to share with us. Who is Mr. Robert Gibson, the Adjunct Professor of the Division of Environment and Sustainability from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And the second is the Ms. Sonalie Figueiras, the founder and CEO of Green Queen and Eco Warehouse. The third one is Valerie Kwan, the Senior Manager of Climate Action 100+ at Asia Investor Group of Climate Change. Robert, Sonalie, and Valerie, welcome you all. Nature loss continues to represent a hidden risk for most businesses, as it drives major impact on operations, supply chains, and markets. With 44 trillion of economic value generation, over half the world's total GDP, depending on nature and its services, biodiversity loss was highlighted in World Economic Forum's last global risk report as one of the top 5 global risks in terms of likelihood and impact in the next 10 years. As a result of Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is TCFD, and other ESG drivers, financial institutions are now reviewing the environmental impact of companies operating in key GHG-emitting sectors that have been damaging natural systems. By making the distinction between climate change and nature, this session will provide an outline of the critical environmental and economic roles fulfilled by nature, highlighting nature's stranded assets and offering a stark warning as to the impact of inaction. The session will include practical best practice examples on how finance can be deployed at scale with attractive returns to allow our natural environment to flourish. The 3 speakers today will share their experience navigating financing and advocating our increased support for policies focused on growing a green economy. The first one will be having Mr. Robert Gibson sharing scenario planning as the key to green finance, responding to the inevitable policy response to climate change with us. Robert Gibson is also a member of the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants, Sustainability and Integrated Reporting Panel. He studied engineering science and economics from Oxford University and worked as an engineering apprentice before qualifying as a chartered accountant in the UK. Mr. Gibson has lived in Hong Kong since 1980. Okay, Robert, this is your turn, and please share more with us.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, it's great.
Thank you. So the session is on how green finance can contribute to the green recovery. And say the answer I want to propose is by using scenario planning to prepare for the inevitable policy response from governments to excess carbon emissions. So I'm now going to go through and try and say what I mean by all of that. So the first thing is that we have a gap between what is needed to avoid truly dangerous climate change and what the global economy is doing. Each year, the United Nations Environment Programme produces an emissions gap report showing the scale of the gap. And this is a graph from the last one that was done in October, November last year. And you can see the lines going upwards as the top one is the policy scenarios that governments were on back in 2005. And then it comes down to something which is called the conditional NDC scenarios. So governments under the Paris Agreement have said, this is our nationally determined contribution. This is the contribution that we will make to decarbonising the global economy. And it's conditional because, for instance, India has said we will decarbonise a lot, but it's conditional on people giving us or lending us a lot of money. So that's the lines going up, and then the lines going down is what science says is needed in order to stabilise at 2, 1.8 or 1.5, and the gap is growing. And sooner or later that gap's going to become so big and the damage that is visible from climate change so great that it's inevitable that the governments will take very substantial policy action. And when they take that action, it could have a big impact on the value of assets in company balance sheets and cause another financial crash. So the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment has published a program talking about this inevitable policy response and how to prepare for it. And as I've already said, the gap gets bigger every year. Sooner or later, the government response is inevitable. The question is when. So under the Paris Agreement, there is a 5-yearly ratchet mechanism. Every 5 years, they do a stock take as to how each country's contribution is going and how does that compare with the science. And they did a stock take last year, and it should have been at this November in Glasgow, getting new commitments on the table. Because of the pandemic, the climate conference has been put back to November next year in Glasgow, and then will be the time when all the countries get together and commit. And it's a certain amount of countries saying, I'll do more if you do more. Where it's great that China has said they're going to get to neutral by 2060, and Japan and Korea have just said they're going to get there by 2050. Europe is already talking about getting there by 2050. I was talking to the Finnish consul who says that Finland will be there by, I think it's 2035. So governments are starting to move in the right direction, but overall far too slowly. Now, when we do have the inevitable policy response, what will it look like? Well, part of it will be trends that are already happening will accelerate. So coal-fired stations, there is a move to phase out coal-fired stations. This might happen much faster. I mean, for instance, it could be that unabated, no carbon capture and storage gets phased out by 2025. If you've got a power station without capture and storage that's burning coal, you have to shut it. Banning Ice Age cars, internal combustion engine cars. Netherlands already talking about doing that by 2030. Implementing carbon pricing, which will push the economy towards lower carbon activity. Introducing carbon capture and storage, particularly for industries such as cement making and steel making. Accelerating zero carbon power, more energy efficiency, land use based greenhouse gas removal. So getting crop programs which store more carbon in the soil, encouraging mangroves, which is something should happen in Hong Kong, etc. Now, all of this goes with enabling the green economy, so government policies which make low carbon economic activity better, and also just transition. that the change that happens has to have a due care to the social and political feasibility. We don't have disadvantaged communities who are going to stop the action. So how do you prepare for the inevitable policy response? And back in 2007-8, there was the last major financial crash. And when the G20 got together and put in coordinated boosts to the economy to stop us from going into depression, they also said, why did our experts not tell us, warn us that this problem might happen? Let's set up a organization which looks for systemic risk in the financial system and gets better understanding so we can see the problem coming and do something about it before it causes major damage to the global economy. So they set up the Financial Stability Board, chaired by this person, Mark Carney, who was then the governor of the Bank of England. And that in turn said, well, look, climate change, this, what I've just called the inevitable policy response, is a big risk to the financial system. If governments make rapid policy changes, then there are going to be a lot of assets which are worth a lot less than they have been. And to some extent, it's actually happening without the government policy response. Because of the pandemic, people have come to realize that the demand for oil in the future will be less than it is now. And you've seen a lot of oil companies writing down their assets very substantially. Anyway, Mark Carney set this up and they formed the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which in 2017 published its proposals, which are now starting to be followed. Mark Carney is now no longer governor of the Bank of England. He's now the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance, and he is coordinating a high-level campaign to make TCFD mandatory. So, what is this tragedy that he was talking about in his speech when he was introducing TCFD back in 2015? It's that a lot of business decisions don't consider their long-term impacts. If you're investing in a truck or something or other, you only need to worry about the next 10 years perhaps as to what's the economy going to be like. You don't have to think about the longer-term consequences. And the result is that climate change impacts, which are very bad in the longer term, don't get considered when decisions are made on, for instance, whether to build a coal-fired power station or go for renewable energy, etc. So the idea is to use scenario planning to identify and manage climate-related risks. So, by the way, this speech is on YouTube. I strongly recommend people watch it. It explains the nature of the issue very well. So TCFD recommends that each company starts off with a set of scenarios and thinks about how its business will fare under different ones. And this diagram here on the left, one has the business as usual scenario. We don't change the carbon intensity climate economy, and we move to a world which is warmer with a lot more severe climate effects, more sea level, acidic oceans, heat waves, etc. On the right, you have aggressive mitigations where governments do take strong action, and we move to a low carbon economy. And you don't have any more coal burning fire stations. You don't have any more cars that use diesel and petrol. You have much more energy efficient buildings, etc. So for each of these, there are risks that a business would face. And this is a diagram suggesting both the risks and the opportunities. So on the left, you have two types of risks. So physical risks, we can, I think, easily identify. So for instance, an acute physical risk would be a severe typhoon coming through. We get them anyway in Hong Kong, but in the future, we're likely to get them more frequently. A chronic risk is something like sea level rise, something which happens long term, and you've got to live with it long term. It's not just a one-off, batten down the hatches for a couple of days while the typhoon comes through and then we're back to normal. It's we've got to do something about protecting the city against sea level, which might in 100 years' time be a meter or more higher than it is today. There are also transition risks. So up in Beijing, they had a problem with air quality. They decided this is going back about 10 years ago, they decided to ban coal-fired power stations within a certain radius of Beijing. So the people who operated those stations suddenly found their asset was worth nothing. Another example of a risk is it's sort of technology, market and reputation, but the problem or the issue that Volkswagen had with cheating on diesel emissions, it suddenly changed the world's view from seeing diesel engine as being the low carbon car, low carbon engine compared to petrol, to the fact that it was killing people with its NOx and SOx emission. And so the trend from diesel and now petrol to electric vehicles got accelerated, partly because of the technology change that electric came along, and partly because with that scandal over the diesel engines, the market view and the reputations caused the change. So that's on the risk side. On the opportunity side, you have things like resource efficiency, better recycling, energy source such as more renewable, and products. And we're using Zoom today. Its product has done tremendously well this year. If you'd put money into Zoom at the beginning of this year, it would be worth 10 times what it was when you put it in. And you take those opportunities and those risks, you feed it into your strategic planning, your risk management, you work out the financial impacts, and you then do your budgeting accordingly. So an example of a company that's further ahead than most is Lend-Lease in Australia. And you can see those 4 scenarios running from resignation, i.e. the business as usual case, we can't do anything, we just live with the climate change, on the left, to the transformation where there's aggressive mitigation and stories about how it works. Here is one of those stories. So their third scenario, the one which goes to about 2 degrees, so more or less Paris aligned. And you can see on the right hand side a timeline here of how the story goes in the future in terms of introducing carbon prices, getting corporate action, geoengineering, etc. And what companies are asked to do is to look at, do the scenario planning, and then see how they need to change for that. So how can green finance contribute to the green recovery? Answer by getting much better decisions on how to invest. And also, if companies see and individuals see the problems that are coming, having done this scenario analysis, then they'll be better positioned to lobby governments to implement policies required to make the investments to allow us to go to the low carbon world. And the UNPRI has published a number of good papers on this. One of them talks about the journey that companies have to go through to implement it. So they start off just sort of getting familiar and thinking about it. They then determine the key factors that impact their business and go and generate the scenarios, and they end up being able to report the scenarios and how their business will fare under the different scenarios. So if you're a company, the question is, well, where are you on this journey? Which of the 4 boxes you're in? If you're an investor and you're putting money into different companies, the question is, well, for each of those companies, where have they got to on this journey? If you have a company that's done TCFD well and has worked out what the risks are and how to respond, it's a lower risk company. It's probably a better investment than if you have one that just hasn't started the journey at all. And for everyone, government delay means more drastic action later. How do we avoid this? And that brings me to my last slide, where I would be grateful if, please, all of you, I have a question. Who should lead decarbonisation? Should it be the government? Should it be companies? Or should it be citizens? And if you can use the annotate to just put hearts or ticks or something or other on the box which you think it should happen. So I'll try and do one myself. In fact, I won't do one myself because I don't want to tell you where it is. But thank you. I've got one person ticking government. Can I see some more?
Hi everyone, you can use the Annotate function when you choose the few options in the toolbar, which is on the top of the screen. And after clicking the few options, you can click to annotate. Then you can draw something or put a stamp in the slide.
Thank you. It's starting to appear. I like the stars. Okay, so we've got 3 for government, 2 for company, 2 for citizens. We'll give it another 10 seconds and see where other people vote. Okay, so I'll stop at that point. I think that you feel that government is the body that should lead. That's got the biggest vote, followed by companies, and citizens a close third. Now, my own personal vote is for citizens, and let me try and explain why. Okay, carry on ticking, but let me explain why. Firstly, as a citizen, you can lobby companies as to what they should be doing. Secondly, as a citizen, you can lobby government and you can vote. And there are lots of you there. You know, we're all citizens. All in our different way, we can take action. If you work for a company, you can be asking, you know, the managers you work for, why aren't we doing more? I did that once when I was working for a company. I ended up getting put in charge of, you know, the company's response to this issue. It made quite a career change for me. So you never know. When you write to your boss and you say, shouldn't we be doing something about it? The answer is, well, yes, we should, and you're going to do it. But you know, if you, as a citizen, lobby the government, and then the government regulates and puts on taxes, that will impact what companies do. So to me, the key people who are going to actually do the hard work of making the change are the companies, but they're only going to do it if they get regulated and taxed appropriately by the government. Otherwise, they'll be saying, if I do this and the other companies don't, I'm at a competitive disadvantage, I'll go bust. So we need the government to do the level playing field, which makes going to the low carbon economy efficient. And for the government, quite often the government says, well, we don't want to do it because the people don't want it. They'll complain that our electricity price will be higher if we go and regulate for lower carbon electricity, etc. So we need the government to feel that the public supports the change, and then the government will hopefully move faster in making it happen. Now, of course, that's not the whole story. Companies have a large voice. You know, they can do massive advertising and influencing citizens. They can also lobby governments and be very influential there. And of course, the government also has a voice. It does public education. So the whole lot works together. But end of the day, my own view is that it's got to start with citizen pressure, pushing our government to make companies and to help companies do the right thing. So that finishes what I had to say. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Very inspiring. Our next session will be the sharing from Ms. Sonalie Vagaris. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of Green Queen, an award-winning impact media platform advocating for social and environmental change in Hong Kong, with a mission to shift consumer behavior through inspiring and empowering original content. She is also the founder and CEO of the Eco Warehouse, the global sourcing platform for certified organic products, with a mission to make safe, quality food accessible and affordable for the whole planet. With over a decade of experience in publishing, digital marketing, organic trade, and health and sustainability, she is also an eco-wellness industry veteran with a keen eye for market trends and a sought-after international speaker and moderator, sharing her expertise on stage across Asia and beyond, including TED and Harvard Business School. Sonalie, please.
Thank you so much. That's a bit of a mouthful. I'm going to be a little more informal. So thank you so much, Professor Robert. That was super interesting. And it's great because I think the coverage was much more about, let's say, kind of policy and government level. And I want to talk more about green finance as a consumer and what does it mean to you. And I'm not going to have a presentation. I'm really just going to kind of break down what a lot of us are kind of missing in our eco, wellness, green consumer journey. So most of us have heard that we need to reduce meat. Most of us try to reduce single-use plastic. Most of us, I assume this is the audience here, but maybe not, but many of us kind of in this sustainability world, you know, we try to buy secondhand, we try to buy less, all of this. And all of these things are very important. As a consumer, we can't have the same effect as policy and government, as Professor Robert explained. We do need some top-down regulation. For example, in Hong Kong, we have no ability to easily compost our food waste. There is a small social enterprise that has bins in 10 locations, but that's hardly enough for most citizens. So as a private consumer, you are sometimes limited in what you can do that is kind of having an effect at a structural level. But one of the biggest blind spots, and that's why I was really excited about this event, is green finance, which is we actually, I'm sure you've all heard the term vote with your dollar. And the idea behind that is whatever you buy, you can choose to support a company, a product, a founder that is mission aligned with sustainability, with ethical values, etc. However, we never think about our money in terms of banking and our capital and our savings and our MPF. We really, that's a huge blind spot in the green movement. If I said to you, do you know what type of how much oil and gas your MPF investments are supporting, you wouldn't be able to answer that to me because you probably have not had that discussion with whoever your MPF provider is. And it's the same thing with, you know, where you buy your house mortgage or your savings account. And this is an area that we're going to see huge development in because, as you know, the financial services industry is undergoing a huge transformation, especially with technology, things like blockchain, things like crypto. I mean, just there's a lot more digital first approaches and a lot more transparency. But right today, when you think about where you're putting your money, and it doesn't matter how much money you have, we all need to work with a banking system. You know, many of us may get a mortgage or a loan of some kind. All of us who are employed have an MPF account in Hong Kong, but we have no connection to that money and how it's being invested and how much of that money being invested is supporting things that we probably as green, sustainably minded consumers don't believe in. So for example, if I said to you, oh, did you know your money is supporting building of coal plants in China? Or if your money is going to support CAFO livestock farming, which is, you know, intense cattle farming where the cows have no space to breathe. And obviously, you know, because of the demand for meat, there's a huge amount of money being invested in, you know, beef rearing, right? Or if I said to you that your MPF money is invested in a company that is helping to, you know, destroy the Amazon by raising down the tropical forest in order to put you know, to make fields for GMO soy, which we're going to feed to beef cattle, right? Most of us would feel very upset about this, especially if in our daily life we're doing everything possible to, you know, reduce plastic, eat less meat, buy consciously. But most of us are not thinking about this part. The other thing is it's really difficult to think about this part because if you call up your MPF representative and you tell him or her, listen, I want to know, is my money supporting Amazon deforestation or is my money supporting coal plant building? He's not gonna know how to answer you. Most financial representatives that are selling you know, retirement fund schemes are not educated about green finance and how much of the money that you're putting away is going to support those type of companies and financial projects. So there are huge blind spots here. And the other problem, and I want to take a step back, and this is not related to sustainability, is that unfortunately, most of us are actually not very kind of savvy about where we're investing our money anyway, right? Most of us don't research every single investment made by every fund on our MPF or the bank that we support. We don't know where HSBC or Standard Chartered or Bank of China is really putting their money. The average consumer has no idea. And right now, it's a very opaque situation. It's not very transparent. It's not like you can go to the HSBC website and you can say, all right, HSBC, which is the largest bank in Hong Kong, it has about 60% of the market share here. So a lot of us are affected by HSBC's decisions, right? And they have by far the most number of ATMs, which is one of the reasons that a lot of people choose them. There's also kind of this cultural connection with an HSBC savings account. So a lot of us have our money with them. But you can't go onto the HSBC website and say, all right, if I'm giving them my money to hold on deposit and they're then using it to invest in projects, what projects are they investing in? How much of it, what percentage of the projects that they're investing in is supporting oil and gas, coal, deforestation, etc.? That information is not readily available. So as a consumer, even if you did want to go down a rabbit hole of trying to really put your savings, your hard-earned money into channels that are only supporting green and sustainable financial choices, you are not really able to do that. So the idea today is really to kind of talk about that, talk about the fact that most of us are not really, unless we work in the financial services, most of us are not really financially literate. You know, most of us get probably a little bit overwhelmed when we go to the bank and we listen to the representative talk about all these things, whether regarding mortgages and loans and repayments and retirement accounts. Most of us feel, you know, a little bit kind of maybe reticent and maybe embarrassed, maybe ashamed to ask questions, maybe also we're busy with other things on a daily basis, so we just kind of put it aside. And unfortunately, if hundreds of millions of people around the world are doing this, so putting it aside, not really focusing on this because they have a million other things to do, all the banks and financial institutions are at an advantage. They are not under any pressure to be more transparent about where they invest their money institutionally. They are under no pressure to provide you with options for greener solutions or greener investment decisions. I mean, yes, there are some ESG funds, there are a couple of green ETFs, and it's great to see that moving in the right direction. There's actually a vegan ETF that launched a year and a half ago, and now it is it's done really well. So it beat the market in the last year. So most people are very happy with that. But these are very few and far between, and they're mostly not accessible to us here in Hong Kong. And so my real message here is, one, are you considering, you know, the green finance part of your conscious lifestyle? Because most of us are not. And two, if you do want to start considering it, you know, you're going to need to have difficult conversations with your bank and your financial institutions, and you may actually find that it's almost impossible to get 100% of your money invested in only green or environmentally friendly or ethical initiatives. I know that I tried to speak to my MPF representative, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He kept sending me to more people and suggesting other funds and just trying to kind of, I felt that he was trying to really shut me up by just throwing a lot of kind of financial information at me that maybe someone else might have just felt tired by and then not followed through. And then eventually I managed to get further and further and realized that there was only one tobacco-free green fund that I could invest in, but that's a very old-fashioned way to look at green investing. I mean, tobacco-free, that's, you know, from 10 years ago. Now we need, you know, I would like to have options to invest in meat and dairy-free funds. I would like to have options to invest in, you know, no fracking, no coal, no oil and gas funds. I would like to have options where I can put my money into bonds for governments that are doing a lot of the things that Professor Robert talked about. So implementing, if I'm going to invest in kind of government or municipal bonds at a city level or at a country level, I would like to support countries that are, you know, trying to be forward thinking and long term about environmental investments within their cities and their communities. Again, I do not have the ability to do that. The only option I had was one, so I could put all my MPF money into one fund that was tobacco free. So I'm not here to sort of give a really great answer because we're not there yet. But what I am here to say is, one, this is a huge blind spot, and you will notice after this event, and if you think about it, that this is going to become a bigger topic. The other thing I would say is you have some options with your employer. As Professor Robert said, you can lobby your employer, you can write letters to HR, you can ask for more options that support environmental and ethical values. I don't know that overnight it will be possible for them to help you, but if more and more employees start asking for this from the employers, then the employers are going to put pressure on financial institutions to offer solutions for retirement funds and such. And then the last thing you can do is really just educate yourself more about how, we have a multi-trillion-dollar global financial system, and currently most of that capital is being deployed for anti-environmental and anti-climate change initiatives and projects and funding. So our global financial system is heavily funding meat and dairy agriculture and subsidies, coal plant building, especially across the developing world, deforestation, whether it's in Malaysia and Indonesia or in the Amazon, and all kinds of unethical initiatives in terms of fashion and consumer goods. And that's more with regards to labor, like factory labor rights that are not being respected. And then the other thing that we support a lot with the global financial economy is, of course, mining in a lot of times in African countries for the little pieces and heavy, the precious metals that go into our electronics, which, as you know, we buy a ton of, and we change and upgrade almost every year. And most of the mining is done by women and children because they have smaller hands, and the precious metals are difficult to get. So even though you could be living this incredibly green life on a local basis, on a daily basis, your money is supporting things you don't believe in. And that needs to stop. And I'm not saying it's the consumer's responsibility to fix everything, because I definitely do not agree with any kind of consumer-only thinking. This is something that needs to happen on a corporate level, and especially on a government level with policy. But somehow we've ended up in this world where consumers can through social media and other ways really make their voices heard, and that forces corporates to act, and then that forces governments to then respond with better regulation and policy. It's not fair. Consumers should not carry that burden. But right now, we're so far away from having a financial system that supports green that we need to do everything we can. So that's going to be the extent of my sharing. I think there are some questions. Is that right?
I think the question can be answered by three speakers in the Q&A session together.
Oh, okay, sure.
And yeah, okay, thank you, and very powerful words from Sonalie. Following will be the sharing from Ms. Valerie Kwan with a focus to serve investors in Asia. Valerie now works to provide a platform and share resources on climate finance, ESG, and sustainable investing. Her career started in public affairs and shifted to environmental, social, and governance. Now keen to facilitate investment decisions on climate-related issues. Valerie, please.
Hi, thank you, Tina. Just checking that I think my slides now look okay. Okay, 15 minutes to go. So thank you very much. I think this is a very interesting panel in a way of in such that we have a very compelling speech from Sonalie. I must agree to that as well. And on the consumer level, what our actions could be on. And from Robert, we have a discussion on the inevitable policy response. And I represent the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, and I would like to share with you some perspectives from an investor group, specifically an investor group representing Asian investors. And one of my key roles within AIGCC is being the senior manager for Climate Action 100+. Climate Action 100+ is an initiative which is also the world's largest global investor collaborative engagement initiative to engage with companies on their climate action. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on there, which I'd like to share with you. And in the context of the pandemic and how that has impacted engagements over the year, I'd like to give some insight into that as well. In response to the topic as designed by the organizers. So, right. So just maybe very quickly to give you some key facts about AIGCC. As mentioned, we are an investor group. So essentially we have members who are investors, institutional, financial institutions, asset managers, asset owners as well, who are all passionate or keen to have more discussions around how climate change affects their risks and opportunities. And also we serve as a platform to discuss low carbon investing and solutions and technologies and so on. So AIGCC, together with our peer networks in other regions, essentially serve as a platform to facilitate such kinds of discussions amongst the investors. AIGCC, compared to our regional peers, we are comparatively young in Asia, and currently we have asset owners and asset managers represented over 11 markets in Asia and internationally, with an accumulated assets under management of over $9 trillion of recent. So what we're known for within the region is particularly the flagship roundtable discussion with CIOs and CEOs of pension funds and financial institutions, really with the objective to mobilize discussions amongst the high-level senior executives on the importance of integrated climate change risks and opportunities into their decision-making processes. And this has been an annual event that has recurred over the past few years. And we have received very supportive responses to these discussions as they begin to grow. Obviously, with this year, it has become a lot more difficult because in-person events are limited, but we continue this discussion on a monthly basis with our members. And we also support them by producing regional thought leadership and sector reports for Asian markets, which are very important for investors as an engagement tool to engage with the companies that they're invested in. Now, it is true that there are a lot of companies, and I'll go into a bit more detail as we go into the Climate Action 100+ initiative. It is true that there are a lot of companies that are responsible for a significant amount of carbon emissions globally. And the standpoint or the view from investors who are involved in this discussion is that we do want to keep a seat in the board to ensure that we have a say to influence the companies with regards to their decision making to transition to a more low carbon model. And by this, we develop tools to support our investors in doing so, and to enable them to convene such discussions with the companies. And this brings me to some of the international projects that AIGCC is involved in. This is a sort of an overview of the collaborations that we are part of. My role as a Climate Action 100+ senior manager, I facilitate together with our regional peers from North America, Australia, Europe, and PRI, covering other regions, on Climate Action 100+, which essentially is an initiative to use the investor voice to drive ambition within corporates. Now, I'll go into a bit more detail here because this is the core part of my role, but there are also other conversations that are equally important. For example, the investor agenda, which is a policy driving initiative, working with a similar group of networks aimed to focus the ambition on driving ambition within investors, and to issue investor expectation statements to global governments to ensure that there is a continuous dialogue and that there is the momentum on, for example, the encouraging net zero ambition, national net zero ambitions that we've recently heard of from China, South Korea, and Japan. Things like these, that they keep on the momentum, and we work very closely together as a coalition, global coalition of investors on climate change. So I might just skip over the details on our structure for the purpose of time, and really just to give you an overview, as promised, on the activities within Climate Action 100+, specifically in Asia during this year, to see how engagements have fared this year despite the impact of COVID, whether or not this has brought any setback to the engagements, and so on. Oops, sorry. So this next slide, really just to give you a very quick overview, I promise I'll be brief, on the scale and also the scope of the initiative. This initiative started off in 2017, towards the end of the year, and we have grown significantly in a way to sense that we have somewhat reached a critical mass of 540 plus investor signatories with accumulated assets under management of over $47 trillion at the moment. And all of the signatories, all of the investor signatories that have signed on to this, initiative pledged to engage with the 160 focus companies in the Climate Action 100+ list. And the importance of noting this 160 companies in the list is that put together, these companies contribute to 2/3 of global industrial emissions. So it's a systemically significant group of companies that we engage with. And obviously, we don't have all 500 investors engaging with all 160 companies at the same time, but we split that is how we split up in regions, split up in smaller groups to have collaborative engagements in groups in smaller investor groups to engage with companies, but all for the same purpose and with the same mandate, and also passing on this next slide the same goals to the companies that we engage with three key asks on governance, to ensure that the companies are able to demonstrate that they can implement a strong governance framework to articulate the board's accountability and oversight on climate change risks and opportunities, and on the action front, that they are able to take action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across their value chain, and to be aligned with the Paris Agreement goals, and finally to provide an enhanced disclosure along the lines of TCFD disclosures. So maybe that is in a nutshell what what Climate Action 100+ represents. We have, over the past 2.5 years, we're almost stepping into the 3rd year mark. Over these few years, we have grown considerably in terms of not only number of signatories, but also in terms of the growth of media interest to the initiative. And with more interest comes also more scrutiny, more responsibility, and then especially the governance structure that we have is on a rotation basis. So we have chairs from Asia, Europe, US, Australia, and PRI on a rotation basis, so that each region is being represented, and they form the steering committee structure. And essentially on the left, what you'll see are some of the media interest from the responsible investor, some of the interviews with our chairs on rotations, and on the right, more interestingly perhaps for this group, is that there is interest on the demands from investors to companies and to governments on the expectations to how they should act. And I think the quote from Bloomberg very well kind of provides a gist of what engagement should be like. And in there it says that the time for reports is over. When it comes to corporate behavior, investors need to demand less talking and more doing. I'm pretty sure that this group, given the interest in the topic, many of us may have seen lots of sustainability reports, the proliferation of that in many of the large companies that we engage with. And essentially what we're talking about, or the focus of the engagements with these companies is that, okay, great, thanks for the reports. Reports are very important, but we do really have very in-depth conversations with companies with regards to what they're actually doing, where they can further progress and how they compare with their regional peers, especially in Asia. This discussion is always a comparison between them and the higher ambition companies set by companies in other regions. So these are all part of the discussions that are going on between investors and companies. And on a sector level, just to quickly highlight, oil and gas companies, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of focus on them, and there are a wave of net zero ambitions since last year and also many more this year that have solidified with more detailed targets and also pledges in billions of dollars being invested into R&D for low carbon technologies and so on. So a wave of net zero ambitions coming from European major oil and gas companies that we do welcome. And also in the US also, very interestingly, that virtually now all of the biggest electric utility companies in the US have announced some form of net zero target. So obviously there is, again, a lot of details that we do need to look into, the meaning, like how meaningful are their targets, what are the supporting midterm targets that they have. These are everything, all of these items are things that we do intend to continue engagements on. But given the sort of US administrative lack of incentive in climate ambitious targets for companies in the US generally, we do see this as a very welcoming move from utilities despite the environment that they operate in. And just finally, on the final two slides, I believe, in relation to sustainable recovery, there are some statements that are issued earlier in the year, essentially asking for a few key things as we start to step into recovery, and that is to prioritize on human relief and job creation across green jobs, to ask for national governments to continue to uphold Paris agreements, which we are very pleased in a way to see some progress continue to be made despite COVID that we've seen in China, Japan and Korea, and also to ensure that the recovery packages addresses climate risk. So on the next slide, well, I'll not go into details, but on the next slide you'll see some of the shades of green and brown of various recovery packages that are being identified by the Climate Action Tracker, which is a report that is very interesting, and people can go into that for their own further reading. And finally, to prioritize on green solutions and to embed investor participation in the recovery planning. So these are the asks that from the investors globally, and in fact there are actually quite a few more. These are only the ones that Aigcc are more directly involved with. There are many of such similar statements on sustainable recovery, which I think people should also look into to see what's being asked in these statements. And finally, I left the link here for people who are interested in to look into for further reading. But I think I might just stop here, given I think I've fared just all right with time. Thank you.